Welcome, everyone. My name is Randa. I'm director of the program on conflict resolution and Track 2 dialogues at the Middle East Institute and a non-resident fellow at Johns Hopkins SAIS Foreign Policy Institute. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel with an esteemed group of experts who are highly knowledgeable about the issue at hand. Before we start the discussions, let me thank Dr. Ibtisam for her invitation. I have been coming to this conference for a number of years, and it has been truly a pleasure to witness the growth trajectory of the Emirates Policy Center under her leadership. I will quickly introduce the panelists. You have their full bios in your program. Starting with Mr. Koby Huberman, who is co-founder of Yozemet, the Israeli Regional Initiative Group, and CEO of Strategic Landscapes, followed by Mr. Ghaith Al-Omari, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and former Executive Director of the American Task Force on Palestine, followed by Ms. Hiba Husseini, Managing Partner at Husseini and Husseini Attorneys and Counsellors-at-Law in Ramallah, and former legal advisor to the Palestinian Peace Process Delegation. Last but not least is Brigadier General Dekel, Managing Director and Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies. I would like to start our discussion today by analyzing the impact of the last Israeli election, the fifth in 3.5 years, on Israeli and Palestinian politics. Now, many observers are calling this election as an inflection point, not only regarding its hard right-wing policies, but also in empowering a more muscular religious Zionism. Some have argued that this election has finally put the two-state solution to rest. It's expected that under this new government, once it's formed, settlement activities will likely intensify, creeping annexation will most likely continue and instigate further frustration and violence among Palestinians that would in turn fuel the far right and will likely limit Israel's ability to advance many of its regional relations. More importantly, in my opinion, this election, if anything, they showed that there is no critical mass among Israeli voters that believe in an independent Palestinian state or in equal rights for Palestinians within a single state. So to start us off, I have asked Hiba first to discuss the implication of this election on Palestinians' political dynamics, and then I will turn to Udi to do the same from the Israeli perspective. Hiba.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for having me. This is my first ever here, and I hope I can impart to you a Palestinian perspective. And also, I very, very much appreciate having a session on our issues, because although not a priority for the rest of the world, I think it is still an issue that impacts the region and global politics within this context. On the election of having former Prime Minister Netanyahu re-elected, number one, it was certainly a disappointment, but it was not unexpected. From a Palestinian perspective, the Israeli right has been on the rise. The extreme Israeli right has been dictating the politics and the policies in Israel for the last decade or so. And so it was not a surprise. How the relationship between the Palestinian leadership and the Israeli leadership under Netanyahu, especially when he is joined by an extreme rightist who supported him in terms of giving him the votes to create the majority that he needed to win the election, is going to be telling in the coming months. But I do not expect that there will be any rapprochement between the two sides. I do not think that Netanyahu will reach out to the Palestinians, to the Palestinian leadership. He has not done that in the past, and this is unlikely now. And as you correctly said, settlement activity will increase, annexation will increase, encroachment on the neighborhoods of East Jerusalem, which is, predominantly Palestinian, will increase. It is not going to be a stable period. And it's not going to be a period that would lend to any kind of an opening for any kind of discussion and dialogue, and even creating a conversation between the Israelis and the Palestinians. I hope it would be different, but I don't foresee that, at least in the coming period.
Udi.
I'm sorry to say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was not an issue during the last elections in Israel. Because basically this is not, I'm sorry to say that, but this is not an issue in Israel because people, let's say, fed up from the situation and don't believe that we are able to promote any positive process between us and the Palestinians. So during the election, nobody speaks about that, not in the right wing and not in the left wing of the elections. The main issue in the elections, of course, was for Netanyahu or against Netanyahu. And the results, maybe there is something positive by the results, because after, as you said, 5 rounds of elections in 3 years, now we will get a stable government for at least 4.5 years, which we need a stable government because we need stability. As everywhere we are speaking about stability. There is another thing which is important to understand, that the people that vote for the right-wing, extreme right-wing party, the main reason behind that was the riots, what we call in our language the pogrom, inside the common cities and towns in Israel in May 21 by Arabs and Jews because of the escalations between us and the Hamas in Gaza, and the situation in Jerusalem, as Hiba mentioned. That created the feeling in the Israeli society, and this is something very important for us because we have to deal with that, because this is, the Arab Israelis are full citizens, full rights as the others, but the friction and the engagement between Jews and Arabs in the street created the ability that there is no enough security inside the towns and the street in Israel, and that there is, we call it enclaves without control by the government, and the people would like that the government will impose its control in those enclaves. That's the reason why, especially young people, voted for the right-wing party, and we have to see what will be the outcome of that. In the Palestinian aspect, I hope that the Abraham Accords will give the government to be more realized that we have to keep our relations with the Arab countries, and this is a very positive process from our point of view, and it will limit the ability of the government to change the reality in the West Bank. I don't see that there is any ability now to promote a process or to promote two-state solution or something like that in the near future, but I assume that the government will take into consideration our relations and our cooperation with the region and not take steps that everybody can come up and against our policy.
Ghaith, Udi, I think, gave a good segue to the question I wanted to ask you, which is, what do these elections mean for the prospects of a two-state solution, and also for the one-state solution?
I mean, actually, I would want to zoom out a little bit and not only talk about the elections, but a snapshot of where we are right now in terms of the prospects. Let me start from the conclusion. The two-state solutions, as far as I'm concerned, is still alive, but it is on life support. It's in a very vulnerable moment. And as we think of how you formulate policy, I think policy should prioritize right now how to address the main points of attack on the two-state solution, how to neutralize them. Let me unpack this. When you talk about a two-state solution, dead or alive, really for me, kind of the death of two-state solution can come from two different sets of issues. Some are concrete, territorial, some are political. On the territorial aspects, I'm not that worried. If you look at the map today, I still think that it's possible through the idea of a land swap, etc., to get a two-state solution. The one issue that is of concern to me is the issue of annexation. If this comes up in the Israeli government, whether as policy or even as rhetoric, this will create a context that will make it very difficult to move forward. The more concerning issue for me is the political aspect. And what do I mean by this? To get a two-state solution, you need to have a political address that has the legitimacy to reach a deal and the capacity to implement it. We already heard about the mess on the Israeli side. It's even worse on the Palestinian side. Today, I see the Palestinian polity probably at its most vulnerable. Take your pick, from the 1930s, early 1990s, very weak, very fragile. Part of this weakness and fragility is no doubt related to Israeli policies. Hiba mentioned some of them, inability of the PA to move forward, to create a narrative, but some of it is domestic. And there is a lot of domestic issues that the Palestinian Authority has been involved in that has created this vulnerability. You look at the PA today. 80% of the public thinks that the PA is corrupt. The PA is unable to provide services in a responsive, efficient way. The political space has been shrinking. Fatah party is becoming like the Ba'ath party. This creates a situation where today a majority of the Palestinians, I think the latest poll says about 60%, believe that the Palestinian Authority is a liability, not an asset. In this scenario, the idea of collapse is not so far-fetched. I'm not saying it's the most likely scenario, but it's a realistic scenario. We're seeing maybe the beginnings of fraying. Look what's happening in Jenin, in Nablus. Loss of security control, loss of political control. So as we look right now of how do you move forward, how do you deal with these in terms of formulating policy priorities, I would say there are two issues that have to be a priority. One is how do you clarify the issue of succession? Because, you know, when you have vulnerability, any shock to the system can create a collapse. So how do you clarify the issue of succession? Abbas is not a young man. Sooner or later, he's going to leave. And the second issue is how do you reprioritize the issue of reform, institution building, something that we have let slide. And to just leave you with a teaser, I believe that in both the issue of succession and the issue of reform, I think the region has an important role to play and an effective role to play, and we cannot move forward without a regional engagement.
On the issue of succession, I know, Koby, I'm going to get to you about, I think that's also part of my question of, okay, what's next, given this political context that has already been outlined and explained. On the issue of succession, especially, of course, among the Palestinians, the day after Abbas, you know, does that create new opportunities, you know, for thinking forward, you know, about new options, new pathways, or does that, you know, create blockages, and that create challenges? I want you to think about that, because I want now to give the floor to Koby and build on what has been said by your fellow panelists in bringing forward your thinking about what should come next, given where we are today.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for inviting me. I think that the situation complexity is clear. There is no political will or capacity on any side to make significant moves forward. There are huge tensions on the ground that are about to explode. But there is a game changer in the region, and that is the Abraham Accord. And I represent the view that we should look at regional dynamics as supporting progress towards the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I can say that the only way to revive the two-state solution goes through a very different prism, through a regional one. And I would like to present the basic 5 principles of what could be an alternative path to the two-state solutions that would leverage the Abraham Accord. It may not be viable politically now, but it could stay on the regional billboard for if and when the relevant circumstances and the leaders arrive. Principle number one, I would call the initiative that I present now something like the Abrahamic initiative to suggest the connection to the Abraham Accord. Principle number one is that the region needs to take responsibility. We've heard this morning from His Excellency Nabil Fahmy and from Paul Salam that the region needs to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as one of the major elements, but also that the region needs to solve its own problems. So I suggest the first principle, let's make sure that the regional leaders will engage in that, other than what we normally hear, that this is not on their agenda. That needs to change on the regional side. Second, there is a need to build a new diplomatic framework that will replace the traditional approach of American-led or internationally led negotiations. I suggest to build a platform that is based on Israel, the 6 partners with which it signed agreements, and a quiet partner, Saudi Arabia. This new framework should lead the way forward. It should build 3 components. The third principle is we must have a political horizon that is not just the two-state solution as we knew it, but something that is by far more comprehensive and offers a regional framework within which two-state solution will be one element, and the others will be regional security platform, regional economic development platform, and regional normalization plan. The second element is, on the short term, immediate stabilization and de-escalation measures. Again, those are very clearly required, and I believe that regional players have a role to play on that. And third, an agreed upon roadmap for state building and parallel negotiations where, because of the fact that there is a political horizon, there is enough motivation to make progress. These 5 principles should be, of course, much more elaborated. But I suggest that we do not announce the death of the two-state solution, yet we describe a new path for reviving it.
One problem that has been common to all the previous negotiation approaches to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is this unequal power dynamics between the 2 parties at the table. I mean, you are bringing 2 parties, Palestinians and Israelis, with totally different power, dynamics, and it's definitely not in favor of Palestinians. How does initiative like yours or those principles try to address these unequal power dynamics? I mean, unless they are addressed, it's going to be very hard for the negotiation to proceed.
If we keep negotiations to bilateral parties, there is, of course, asymmetry here. If we widen the scope of negotiations between Israel to the Arab world and the Palestinians in a triangular manner, the whole calculus could change.
Yes.
And also, the Arabs, if you want, I will elaborate later, the Arab states can offer a lot in order to offer a different mechanism that would overcome this lack of symmetry between the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Hiba, what's the thinking right now? What's the current thinking right now among Palestinians of the way forward?
It's difficult. It's very difficult to see the day after, really, because again, the issues that my colleague, especially Ghaith, has described, and Udi, and the situation on the ground is really paralyzed today. And it's very difficult to see how to step forward and to create a momentum for dialogue, even within the context of a regional proposal or any other proposal. And there are a number of proposals, and I'll be also happy to share with you one other alternative that takes the two-state solution as the end game. But to answer your question, you have the internal Palestinian dynamics, which are very complicated today between Hamas in the Gaza Strip and Fatah in the West Bank. You have the changes within the PLO leadership as Abbas is aging, and we're trying to figure out the succession plan. We haven't had elections in so many years. This is part of the dysfunctional PA that Ghaith is talking about. You have ailing institutions, you have a very complex situation on the ground in terms of movement and access. We still have to deal with the day-to-day issues of the occupation. We still have roadblocks, we have checkpoints, those have not been eliminated from our path. So you have a whole set of issues that do not lend themselves again to a dynamic for immediate change. You have the situation in the refugee camps where you have youth, the number of youth is increasing by the day, and these youth in the refugee camps and elsewhere do not see the way forward except through sending messages to Israel that Israel understands the language of violence. And so, okay, I'm going to take the conflict on my own. I'm going to shoulder the responsibility as youth, and I'm just going to go into the streets and express myself and have my voice heard. This is how I, as a youth, coming from the refugee camp. So all of these social issues and that have underlying political issues have not been dealt with properly. And this is where you see all the frustration coming from. You also have a situation on the ground in terms of creating even a rapprochement or if you will, reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. This we have been attempting to work on for years and years, and we have not succeeded so far to create that, to heal that wound, really. And it's a wound that really has festered and continues to fester and hurts the Palestinian national interest. So we have to deal with all of these issues simultaneously with what is going on in the region and with the world. I mean, and we saw this with the pandemic and with COVID. How to get even the vaccines in was a big issue. Where do we buy them from? Where do we order them? Will Israel give them to us? And so forth and so on. So you still have, as I said, the day-to-day issues, the youth issues, the PA functional, autonomous, limited authority, because it's very limited functional authority. You have the movement and the access. You have the Jerusalem issue. The Jerusalemites, like myself, who I go to Ramallah every day and I cross checkpoints every day. So all of these things are happening all the time. So to get to the next day, to get to the succession, to get to alternatives are very difficult in the immediate future perspective. Now, midterm to long term, definitely. The approach should be to re-engage members of the international community, to engage our Arab neighbors, to take advantage of the Abraham Accords to see how we can create a momentum to create the environment for economic cooperation, security cooperation, and so forth and so on, and then open the door to alternatives. I believe personally that the two-state solution is the only solution. Is it feasible today? No. Will it be feasible in the long term? I think it's the only way forward. And I can, again, I don't want to take up too much time from my colleagues, so let's take the next question and then I'll share with you other thoughts.
Okay. Let's just think a little bit outside the box in light of what Hiba talked in terms of the challenges here. I mean, we have had recently a successful model of conflict resolution between Israel and Lebanon, right? It's a model of a transactional, win-win, issue-based, very specific, negotiation that led to a mutually acceptable agreement on delimitation of the maritime borders. Granted, the negotiations have been going on and off for the last 12 years with the US mediation, but we got where we are despite And this agreement did not really affect in a major way, or did not affect at all, the conflict dynamics underpinning the relationship. It was just a win-win approach to deal with a specific issue. Is that model replicable in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict theater, especially when it comes to offshore gas deposit, maritime border between Gaza and Israel?
I don't think so, because we have two people which are fighting on the same, about controlling the same land, which both sides believe that this is its own homeland, and there is a combination of religious and ethnic and ideas, everything coming together. And so this is not a tactical issue that you can solve and both sides can enjoy from that. There is veterans in the peace process, and I was the head of the negotiation team with the Palestinians in the Annapolis process under Prime Minister Olmert. And I used to tell the story, and it brings us back to the deadlock that we are here today, that I sat with many hours with Al-Rahmo Saib Arikat, and I told him, Saib, you can get, this is very good proposal for you, because you can get 97% of your demands. This is much, I don't know how many, much better than your current situation. Why you don't take it? And the answer was all or nothing. And this is the big problem of the conflict. All or nothing, both sides, living by it, all or nothing. And that's the reason why I agree with Koby that we have to change the bilateral to the multilateral approach. But I would like to say something about the position of the people in Israel. If you check now, it's according also the elections, that something like 55% of the Israelis now against the establishment of Palestinian state. That wasn't the picture 10 years ago. And they don't believe that something good will come from establishing of Palestinian state, because for them it will be for sure terror state, like Hamastan in Gaza, we will be the same in the West Bank, and it will be big mistake. And people believe that that's something that is not now on the agenda or on the table. But 45% of the Israelis are afraid of the demographic situation, because we don't like to achieve or to arrive to one-state reality. Because in one-state reality, we have to give full rights to the Palestinians. In that case, we will not be a Jewish state. So if we would like to keep Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people, we have to separate. So something like around that, 45% of the Israelis would like to find the way that to separate. So this is the big debate in the Israeli society today, how to deal with the situation. The problem that both sides, the leaders, have, something like comfort zone, that they don't have to take the hard decisions. Everybody taking small steps, in the international community, challenging Israel in the UN and other places, and some activity on the ground, but nothing changed in the dynamic between the two sides. There is something very interesting, because even what I said about the population in Israel, when you check the people, if they support, we call it now separation, because two-state is almost dirty word, so separation, then you can find that more than 60% of Israel is supporting. I'm speaking by political, demographic, and territorial separation from the Palestinians. So there is still understanding that we have to find another way to establish new reality. And I agree that the main mission today is, first of all, to bring the region, that it will be multinational conflict or a process. And then Israel have to do another three things. I will say it very, very short. First of all, I prefer negotiating. When you sit in the same table or around the same table, the same room, you can find zone of possible agreement. So we don't have to start with Jerusalem, but there is other things that we can do and going immediately for implementation. The second one, Israel today can start in steps of, we call it separation steps, to give more space to the Palestinian that they will enjoy from, let's say, contiguity, ability to move from one side to the other side. Today, something like 300,000 Palestinians living under Israeli control area, what called Area C. I'm not going to elaborate all the flexibilities there, but something like them, there are villages and towns of Palestinians that spill over to the Israeli control area. We can bring those areas to the Palestinian that not 95% as today, 90% of the Palestinian will be under the Palestinian Authority and other elements. There is third pillar, which is important because today it doesn't work very well. There is a formula. As long as the Palestinian security apparatuses will do more, Israel will do less. If they don't come to dismantle terror infrastructure, Israel will not stay and wait. Israel will go in and dismantle the terror infrastructure. This is the only way to prevent terror against our towns. And the last pillar, I'm coming back to Koby, this is the region. We have to bring the region. The Palestinians were against that during the last 2 years after Abraham Accords. Today they are more flexible because we maintain a lot of discussions about that. They're more flexible to understand that they can achieve a lot of benefits from bringing the region to the process.
We're going to get to the outside actors and how can they impact the conflict, you know. But I want to give the floor to Ghaith to speak a little bit about youth activism, you know, among Palestinians, which we have seen it, at least me in the States, I've seen it very much in relation to the Sheikh Jarrah eviction and how it was smartly conducted, meshed into, you know, a global solidarity movement for Palestinian rights. And where do you see this going? Does it have the potential to unlock the status quo in a more creative way? I mean, by bringing in, you know, the outside in a more positive, in a way, engagement with on the issue of Palestinian rights.
I mean, if I may first, though, react to a couple of things that my colleague said. To what you said, Hiba, about Hamas-Fatah reconciliation, I don't think we should have reconciliation. I think artificial unity is a recipe for a future explosion. And I don't see it happening, and I just don't believe that we should be spending any political capital on such a process. So that's one. Elections, be very careful about the elections.
So before you get, how do you overcome those divisions? You know, how can you bring the Palestinians around a negotiating party? Huh?
It's not possible to overcome the divisions right now. You have to manage the current situation. Frankly, you have two narratives. One has to be reaffirmed and one has to lose. And until that happens, there will be no real unity. There will be just posturing. On elections, be very careful about elections. Without strong institutions, elections ultimately will end up with what we had back in 2006. I wouldn't start with elections. When we talk about the region, and very quickly, and I know we're going to come back to it.
We are going to get to the region. If you focus on the civic activism, you know.
Civic activists, look, I am not that optimistic. What we see right now is not really, I don't see a movement. I see small pockets that often get activated in reaction to a local issue, and they die out when the local issue dies out. There is no movement that is linking all of these different activism, partly because they think in different political terms, they respond to different issues, they have different objectives, as Hiba mentioned a bit earlier. And there is the one thing that Fatah and Hamas agree on is whenever they see a new power emerging, they will work together to put it down. Now, in terms of how this plays out internationally, I'll be very, very careful in kind of overplaying, you know, what I hear from many Palestinian activists. Oh, the world is changing, public opinion is changing. Look at Black Lives Matter is now supporting us. Aligning with marginal actors internationally will only further marginalize the Palestinian issue. And to my mind, these movements, these political movements that tend, BDS, etc., the boycott, divestment, etc., that tend to align with the margin of the political actor, whether on the left, mainly on the marginal left, will not help the Palestinians, will actually make the Palestinian issue less attractive for the mainstream to engage with.
I'm going to get back to you about the regional actors, but let me ask Hiba to comment on the civic activism among the Palestinians, especially among the youth.
Sure. But before I do that, I think I would beg to disagree. I have to disagree with Ghaith. Listen, I think your perspective is very strategic long term, but I'm think about the issues on the ground today because I live them every day. And I think I agree that the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas is very difficult in terms of sorting out all issues, but I think having election in the near term is very important. I think this is a demand that the Palestinian people are asking for every single day. It will be somewhat of a game changer. We need succession, we need new leadership, and I think the election will give us that opportunity, will open the door. Now, on youth. I think if we are to look at youth in Palestine today, I would categorize it in probably different categories, 1, 2, 3. You have youth who are totally apathetic. They feel totally alienated from the Palestinian leadership in both Ramallah and Gaza. They are not politically inclined. You have youth, as I said, who want to take the conflict and shoulder it and fight for freedom, liberty, and dignity. You have youth who think communicating with the outside world using social media, as they did in the Sheikh Jarrah situation, would be very, very effective. So you see different approaches. They don't have direction because there is no a long-term perspective on the conflict, and because there is no guidance. So now you're seeing individual actors, even among youth. This is very dangerous also, because if some are so alienated, it means we cannot engage that group of youth. Others who want to become very militant and without direction, that's dangerous. And then youth who think that social media is the answer. So again, complicated scenario, very challenging, and it's a function of loss of direction and leadership.
Thank you.
If
yes.
I can say
you want to add,
and
you want to add?
Yes,
yeah.
about
okay.
that, because we try to make some kind of conversation with the young Palestinians by the social media, because in that case you can understand better their position. First of all, most of them, they are not supporting any more two-state solution. They would like one state, equal rights. This is the slogan. They call it no state, but they want one state, equal rights. The problem that they don't have leader or somebody which are leading that group. They are against the Hamas on one side and against the Fatah on the other side. But there is no, growing of new leadership that they can support. Maybe this is time of process. But I assume that those young people and some, we spoke yesterday a little bit about the civil organizations, they have to bring new idea of leadership in the Palestinian side that the most of the people can support it.
Let me get to the regional, to the actors, to the outside actors. You referred in your earlier remarks about, the region, looking at a regional multilateral approach as a way, as a path forward, So, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. With your permission, I'd like to link it to what was just discussed.
I'm feeling as a moderator, my power has been undermined. Everybody says with you. Go ahead.
My first comment is, we're not just talking about measuring the degree in which there is activism or pessimism or despair or frustration. We may face a black swan in a cataclysmic eruption of violence in the next month under certain circumstances, which will spill over from the Palestinian territories to Gaza, to the Israeli mixed cities, will involve refugee camps, will involve other organizations and other players. The battlefield is not necessarily amongst specific leaders. The battlefield is now happening in TikTok. And therefore, in preparation for a potential black swan, the regional players should act and act fast. And I can say I've counted 7 things that they can do in order to change the reality gradually. And then I will end up with 2 optimistic observations. The regional players should do right now the following. First, they need to de-escalate and calm the situation on the ground and build and force cooperation, lack of irreversible steps, and invest money in specific projects to change the reality on the ground. Second, the regional players should stabilize the internal political situation in the Palestinian Authority and should prepare for the day after in order to prevent the horrible scenarios that everyone expects of militia-based succession planning, succession fighting on the Palestinian leadership side. They have to act and they know what they need to do. Third, they need to leverage the relationship with Israel and offer incentives and leverage their position with Israel in order to make sure that there is more flexibility vis-a-vis the Palestinians and readiness to move forward politically. Number 4, they need to start, when the process that I propose is operationalized, they need to get an active role in helping building the state institution, the Palestinian state institution, and state building. Number 5, eventually, regional players must be involved in the solutions for some of the core issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians, whether it is Jerusalem, refugees, or security. Number 6, they have to strengthen, deepen, and widen the Abraham Accords and think about potential new players and potential new dimensions in parallel to the effort of reaching solutions with the Palestinians. And number 7, I don't want to coin a new phrase in international relations, but we talk about soft power. Let me share the idea of mind power. We need to address the battlefield on the mindset shift in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but throughout the region as a whole. There is a poisonous effort going on that kills the hope and the aspirations of young generations everywhere in the region. And as it was suggested this morning, we need to build an alternative vision. I would prefer a vision called MENA 2050 that is in the making by civil society activists in the region to portray some potential hopeful horizon for young generations everywhere. Now let me say why I am optimistic.
Let me stop you here. Is that okay? I want Ghaith to, make his comments, and then I want to open the floor, and hopefully, in response to your questions, you can include your optimistic, perspectives. So, Ghaith.
2 quick reactions and 1 point to dig deeper on. First of all, when you talk about regional engagement in the core issues, I would approach this very, very delicately, especially when it comes to Jerusalem. We all know the tensions between the Jordanians and the Saudis, and this has to be managed very carefully. That's one. When you talk about support, I mean, you talked about one kind of support, which I fully agree with, which is, financial, etc. There's another kind of support. I remember when we were involved in the reform process under Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, we used to get a lot of our assistance, technical assistance, etc., know-how from the West. You know what, today, I look at the region. I mean, we're in Abu Dhabi today. I look at the amazing work that has been done here to create one of the most efficient governance systems that I've seen anywhere. I think this is one area we bring in the region to participate. A footnote here, it's interesting. Of all of the reform efforts that we saw in the early 2000s, the one that was most stable and has most lasting was security. Partly because the Jordanians were the ones who trained it. There is a degree of cultural kind of ability to engage these issues that we don't have. The third one, though, which is the one that I actually want to dig a bit deeper on, is the issue, deeper but quicker, is the issue of we need the Arabs. Okay. We always talk about the need for the US and the West to pressure the Israelis, and I'm all for it. You know, this is the nature of foreign policy, but we also need the Arabs to play a role in pressuring the Palestinians. Because ultimately, if you don't get the Palestinians to be pushed in the right direction, if you leave them to their own instincts, we will get nowhere. Now, there's a problem here in operationalizing this. To pressure the Palestinians, the tip of the spear has to be Jordan. It's the one with the most leverage, the most insight. Jordan is too hesitant to do this. Jordan is worried about the region. So we actually have to have a regional aligned, regional coalition to support the Jordanian and Egyptian roles. To do that, this requires, in particular, a Gulf role, requires creating some trust between Jordan and Saudi. And this is, again, where the UAE can play a really important role, because this is the one country that's now moderating this relationship.
Hiba, before I turn to questions, the floor is yours.
You just took the words out of my mouth, definitely. So I will just remind that on Jerusalem, for example, whenever we have the escalation, Jordan comes in, because Jordan already plays that role over the holy sites. It's part of the agreement with Israel, the Wadi Araba agreement, and it's also the agreement between the Palestinians and the Jordanians. So we see an effective role playing there. And of course, whenever something escalates in Jerusalem, especially during the high holiday season, the Jewish holidays, Muslim holidays, and Christian holidays to the same extent, actually, during Easter and Christmas, because you have pilgrims coming in. Even the Emirates, the Arab, the Gulf states, they react immediately when escalation takes place. So my point, it should not be a one-off or during holiday seasons. I think there's a role, there's a need, and the Palestinians, if they were left to our own devices, we will be self-destructive. So that's why I think it's very, very important to have a regional role and to get the Palestinians and the Israelis to talk under the auspices of regional sponsorship.
It's interesting, I have to say, that nobody mentioned the US, right? It's more the region. I'm just commenting. Yes. So I have a specific instruction from the lady boss, Dr. Ibtisam. I have to finish this session at 2:15. So we have 3 questions, and if possible, you ask the question, please, and no commentary, and so that we can give the floor to the panelists to answer. I'll start first with Mr. Al-Badr Al-Shatiri. Mr. Al-Badr Al-Shatiri, please introduce yourself and the question, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. My question is very quick to Koby. It seems that his initiative smacks of the Arab Initiative, which is, full recognition in two states. Now it seems that, and I'm sorry to disagree with my colleague Koby, that not only we shouldn't declare a two-state solution as dead, I think it's long dead, is overdue to be buried. And we should think of different models of settling this conflict. Perhaps we can use the Swiss model, where Israeli Jews can have their autonomy and their Jewish character and culture and identity, the Palestinian Arabs, the Israeli Arabs, and there could be like 3, 4 cantons, and there is some federal system, because I don't see a two-state solution possible anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Majdi Allam.
Yes. I'm actually referring to the situation of Lebanon and Israel in the gas wells on the Mediterranean coast. It's amazing for me, maybe in 1 week or 2 weeks, everything being so done so quickly, despite the fact that Israel, for more than a year, saying that this biogas well is owned by Israel. But because of the USA decision, and because of Mr. Aoun, the president of Lebanon, and because of the Christian and some of the religious department of Lebanon, in 1 week, Israel returned in its usual declaration that this well and biogas is Israeli one, not Lebanon one. So this is an example how USA and the mega power can influence Israel and the other partners to have an agreement. This is a very practical module. We must study it well, how we can do this. The other point is related to Ibrahimi religion, that including the Jews, Christianity, and Islam. I think this is an only Israeli proposal, not accepted at all by all the other religions, especially with the religious leaders. They cannot agree for the Ibrahimi approach as an alternative approach. There must be a peace for neighbors, states, recognition of Palestine as a state, not as a population, not as people, not as refugee. Palestine is the original. Israel is coming so recently. If you need a piece of land for Israeli, you must agree with Palestine to keep your right and their right. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Makowski, question, please.
Yeah.
Especially if you are specific, if you have
Yeah,
specific
very
questions.
just specific. I thank to the panel for a very interesting discussion. I'm just wondering that could we use the creativity that we're seeing with the Project Prosperity, with the Emirates, with Jordan and Israel, the solar, green for red, green for blue, energy for electricity, the use of private sector, sovereign wealth investment funds. Can we see that creativity used to help the private sector in the West Bank? I think we all agree that political negotiations are not going to advance a lot given the election situation, the leadership in both Israel and the Palestinian Authority. So here's a case of where the region is creating new political space in Jordan, where you didn't have economic projects, and like was mentioned about Lebanon, here are two countries at war but are finding a way to do business. In other words, the region is looking for more, paradigms, it seems, for creativity. So the use of private sector from the Gulf to expand hope for people on the ground. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you, I think there is a question addressed to you in particular, Koby, right? And then anybody else would like to address also David's question in terms of creativity. Koby.
Two questions.
Yeah, two questions. Okay,
I will address.
Koby.
Okay, first of all,
Short answers, please, because we have another because we have another round of questions.
First of all, I still think that we need to stick to the two-state solution as the only viable solution to end the conflict, and we need to work hard on finding new ways to get to it. Anything else, my friend Al-Badr, is a recipe for never-ending conflict and bloodshed, I'm afraid. To my friend David Makowski, I fully agree. The dynamics that we see with civil society across the region and business community is one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic. And let me share two more reasons why I am. We cannot rule out the possibility of progress. First, I'm not a representative of the Israeli government, nor do I speak on behalf of our elected prime minister. But let me just say that he has signed more agreements with Palestinians and 4 other Arab states, more than any other Israeli leader in the past, and he has never done this in cooperation with his coalition partners. So don't rule out his possibility of moving forward. Netanyahu wants to reach an expansion of the Abraham Accords. I believe he wants to see a deal with Saudi Arabia, and he understands the price. And the second reason for being optimistic is in contradiction with my friend Udi. I believe that the Israeli public opinion is mobile. Israelis didn't want PLO as negotiators and representatives of the Palestinian people back in '93, and within 3 months after the Oslo Accord were signed, they all of a sudden supported it. No other than Netanyahu could mobilize the Israeli public, and if he makes a decision, then anyone else, or the majority of the Israeli people, will go behind him.
Hiba.
Thank you. On the question of an independent Palestinian state first, I totally agree with that question. I think so long as Palestine is not a sovereign, independent state, free and able to make a decision, we are not going to have a true, real peace. So any model, and I've been working on a model called the Confederation with an esteemed Israeli colleague, Dr. Yossi Belen, and the idea there is to declare Palestine a sovereign state first, then enter into a confederation with the State of Israel with a modular approach to having other states in the long term join, like Jordan perhaps, and what have you. But the idea again is, I totally agree as a Palestinian, and there's no two way about it. To be autonomous is a formula for a continued conflict management and continued state of occupation. So, and this has to end, and there's no two way about it to have peace or any other model to work. On the issue of regional cooperation, I also totally agree. I think the Palestinians need to be included. We need to change our thinking in terms of having a state first, and then all the economic development comes second. I think they can go hand in hand, and that would not, regional cooperation or cooperation on energy, using new technologies, and so forth, all of these creative ideas to create investment in Palestine and to create investment opportunities and hope for the Palestinians can come through these regional cooperation. But we have to, A, be invited, and two, we have to think, to change our own thinking.
Udi, and then Ghaith.
I agree that somebody said that the situation today, that there is two entities in the Palestinian side. There is Gaza under Hamas and the West Bank under the PA. And I cannot see how they find the reconciliation and the unity of those areas. And there is somebody raised the issue of the maritime border. As you know, Israel accepted that the PA will be getting the energy that in the Gaza water. This is a very long time understanding and agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. So now everybody said, like in Lebanon, let's see if we can use that, the Palestinians can use that energy for the Palestinian purposes. And we have to see how they find the way between the PA and the Hamas, how they are going to organize that ability to use that energy in the water of Gaza. Basically, I agree with something which somebody said here, which is very important. We have to see in the front line of the region, Jordan and Egypt. Jordan and Egypt understand very well the conflict. Jordan and Egypt have very good relations and cooperation with Israel, especially security cooperation. They have leverage on the Palestinian side, and we need them in the front. The problem, there is reluctant. Nobody would like really to put its hands in that conflict, not inside and not outside. And we have to change that perception that there is no way to go forward in that conflict.
Ghaith, you want to comment further on this?
Actually, no. I have to address a couple of questions. I agree with Odian. That's why I said, again, you need the regional alignment to give back to Jordan and Egypt, because alone they cannot do it.
But then he's saying they are not interested in stepping forward for it.
Especially the Jordanians, I think, interested or not, they have no choice because this is a national security matter for them. The question is, how do you embolden them and how do you give them enough comfort to move in that direction? But if I may, just two quick points. I mean, here on I would disagree with the Hiba and I would disagree with Mr. Magdi. The Palestine first approach, I think, is think of the past. What we heard this morning, what we heard yesterday from Dr. Gargash, we are in a post-ideological Middle East right now. Palestine first is a part of the old ideologies, be it Pan-Arabism, be it Islamism, etc. Today, countries are focusing on their own interest. And the sooner that the Palestinians realize that, the sooner they can benefit from it. If you think that the Palestine issue is going to be, Palestine first and everything opens up, I'm afraid the Palestinians will be left behind. There's a new reality. We have to understand it and we have to adapt. But let me finish on a positive note and answer to respond to David's question. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And let me throw maybe a concrete idea here. We see a lot of high-tech cooperation between Israelis and Emiratis here and in Dubai. We see a lot of Palestinians who are interested in the high-tech sector with a degree of academic education, but with actually no experience, do not have the kind of operational culture that Israelis have coming out of the IDF, that the Emiratis have coming out of their incubators. Would be very interesting if we start bringing some Palestinians as in an apprenticeship program, in a partnership program, and then go back and be able to be absorbed in the high-tech sector in Israel, and maybe even Jordan can play a role here. So I think this approach, there's a lot that can be done here, and as Hiba said, you can do this in parallel to the ideas of how do we make political progress.
Very short. I have a hard stop at 2:15. So.
As we speak, more Palestinians are opening up, realizing that the Abraham Accord are an opportunity, and they are beginning to think about this. They mostly come from the business society, business communities, and there are business transactions that could be built based on what David asked and what you just said. Second, if an Arab leader comes to Jerusalem after all the necessary negotiations, it will change the mindsets of Israelis, and things will move forward. As Sadat did in '77, I believe that there is a need for a disruptive, positive gesture that will change the dynamics on the ground.
At this point, I thank you very much for a very insightful discussion. I thank the audience. I'm sorry, I have a number of questions. A number of people who requested to ask questions. We don't have time. Again, hard stop 2:15. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.